We take some questions from the media now, and after that we're going to have a lunch engagement. Very quickly we grab a bite and then we head down to Point Lisa to the Guyanese delegations and Trinidad and Tobago delegation. And I trust the media is with us as well? Yeah. Good. So we'll have lunch quickly after a few questions and we go to Point Lisa's. The floor is open to the media for questions, if you have any. Please identify yourself and place your question.
Ryan Hampton Davis, Trinidad Newsday. Well, I was hoping that you could go a little bit deeper into the non-tariff barriers, things that are more specific as to what are the actual barriers and how they're being treated with at this point.
As a former Minister of Agriculture, let me give you a little idea of how non-tariff barriers go. Tariff is the structure you put in place as to what taxes you pay when you bring things into your country. Those are the tariffs set by mathematical arrangements. But there are some other things you can do to prevent something from coming in the country. Let me give you an example. I remember when I was Agriculture Minister, we wanted to sell pork to Jamaica, because Jamaica ate a lot of jerk pork. And Trinidad and Tobago, we had a good pork producing infrastructure here. But then we couldn't, because while there was no tariff against the meat from Trinidad, because we had the CARICOM access to the Jamaican market, the Jamaican interest group, mainly technical people, use animal health to say you Trinidad, you had that pig disease, swine. You had swine fever 25 years ago, and therefore we can't buy any pork from you because your pork might introduce swine fever into Trinidad, into Jamaica. And as a result of that, we couldn't sell any pork from Trinidad to Jamaica. As a result of that, the pork business in Trinidad and Tobago, which was heavily supported by the government and the private sector in Trinidad and Tobago, shrunk. By the same token, there's a lot of meat in South America. When I was a student, when I was working with the university and worked in South America a lot, you could get a great meal in South America, in Chile, for $5 US. But then, that was because South American cattle production could not sell its meat in the international market because of fear of foot and mouth disease. Subsequent to that, it has been determined by USDA that there is the possibility of producing in South America cattle that will produce beef that is safe for export into the US market. But somebody in Trinidad and Tobago with a degree in something working for the government says, if the meat is coming from South America, it has foot and mouth disease, it can't come in here. Today, the same meat that was selling for $2 a cut in Chile, in my day down there, today is now being sold on the same price as Australian or New Zealand meat, because foot and mouth disease has been overcome in a way that you can produce it and sell it safely, because there are production systems in South America. And if those systems are available to us in CARICOM, then South American meat should be available to CARICOM populations. I tell you this so you can see that there are things you can do that are not tariff. And those things are subjective. Sometimes a custom officer, by him or herself, alone, using the customs law of the country, could say, well, this can't come in. And a lot of that is happening in CARICOM. As a matter of fact, if you had attended a lot of CARICOM heads meeting, the last Prime Minister of Grenada, Keith Mitchell, and Keith Rowley is Keith Mitchell, there's a standing joke in CARICOM where the two Keiths have a session at heads over honey. Grenada honey and Trinidad honey. Because Trinidad does not allow honey to come from Grenada, because Trinidad is protecting its honey production, its bees, from diseases that are not now in Trinidad, but may be introduced if honey comes from somewhere else. So that's how it works. But once that is in play and is not under strict control or reduction or elimination, then the whole idea of the single market and economy is undermined. We have similar, the Minister of Trade could probably tell you a bit more about that in great detail. Talk to the Minister of Trade and she will tell you about all the non-tariff barriers that exist in CARICOM. And those are impediments to production in the region. And once there are impediments to production in the region, it invites supply from outside of the region.
Follow up, if you don't mind. Mr. President, if I may, has there been any conversation or consultation with the Georgetown Chamber with dealing with the non-tariff barriers and the issues surrounding those things? Because there has been some issues raised from that organization itself.
And you should introduce the president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce here, who's not known to the Trinidad press. So we have the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce here, right, who is a great friend of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Right?
So I think Timothy has been very active, and we are very clear on transparency in this relationship. And after we signed the MOU, we agreed that we will include all the stakeholders on this agenda because we need everyone on board. And Timothy, the chairman of the Georgetown Chambers, is on board with us. The Prime Minister appointed a technical task force as part of the list of things that has to be done. That technical task force, part of their responsibility is to work on the removal of all the non-tariff barriers. And we have already have a complete list of all the non-tariff barriers, and you will see the potential that exists. But Prime Minister pointed to a very important issue, and that is standardization. You can ask 10 public servants to interpret a statute, and they might give you 10 different interpretations. So what we want to do in this task force is to have the interpretation done for them by the policymakers. So no individual can determine or try to interpret a statute outside of the interpretation that will be given. You know, when you craft legislation and law, you will see in front you have each phrase and what it means, and the definition, a section on definition. So we will have to, in this task force, define a lot of these things so that the subjectivity that is in the system is removed. One of the things that is critical for the success of this is ensuring the institutions function. We can't run to a minister's desk every second to get clearance on something. The system must work. So we have to solve the systemic problems, and that is what the Prime Minister is pointing to. We are now saying loudly that we recognize that there is a systemic problem, and we have to solve those systemic problems. And we are committing ourselves to the resolution of those systemic problems through this task force. So that commitment is there. One of the things in terms of the Georgetown Chambers is for us to, and that is why I said, is the building of trust and who leads the relationship. Governments have a relationship to define, a responsibility to define the path in the relationship. And we are sitting here making it very clear what is the path we're defining. Not for anyone outside there to decide what is the path of the two countries. We are making it very clear what is the path and the necessary steps that we must take if we are to advance that pathway for the development of the people of both Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. And this brings me to one final point. Let me address it before you ask it. There's a lot of distributors, large distributors in the region, who feel threatened because of what we are pursuing. But really, should they feel threatened? Absolutely not. This is a major opportunity to reverse engineer what they're doing and benefit two ways. You benefit through distribution and you benefit through the production process. And instead of bringing things down from the US and Miami, we can now push produce up. And the Prime Minister Rowley made an important point. Who are our strategic partners? All over the world today, countries are positioning their strategic partners with them. We have not leveraged our proximity through Guyana with northern Brazil and the potential that exists there and what exists there. We are now setting a framework through which we can leverage that potential to the benefit of the people of this region, the businesses of this region, the distribution channels of this region, but more importantly, to our diaspora.
Hi, good afternoon. Alicia Boucher from TV6. I just want clarity on something. It sounded like we are going through the CSME to address the non-tariff barriers. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but if that is the plan, is there any other way that through the partnership between Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana that we could actually reduce some of these non-tariff barriers on our own without going through the CSME?
The answer is yes, because goods arrive at individual ports, whether the port is Kingston, Georgetown, Port of Spain, and it's at that port that somebody makes a decision as to whether the goods will enter or not. CARICOM has arrangements where there are meetings, I think every quarter, dealing with trade issues, and there are some sticky, stagnant trade issues, or things might arise that require some intervention. But in terms of the average day, the average trade item, the decisions are made at the individual ports. And that's where the non-tariff barriers come into work. And you will find that the non-tariff barrier in St. Vincent is different to the one in Grenada for the same product, or the one in Trinidad for the same product, for different reasons. And that's what we're trying to get out of the way. Because if we're saying that we have a common market, a single market and economy, that should mean something. A single market and economy means that a perfect example of a perfectly working single market and economy means that you should have goods going to any part of the market unimpeded. You should have people going to the market. You should have financing going to the market. For example, one of the things you're working on right now, and it was raised in the last heads of government meeting, why we're working towards coming to a point where a company registered in any CARICOM country should be deemed to be registered in every other CARICOM country. So if a company is registered in Port of Spain, that registration should be noticed in Guyana. And how do we do that? Maybe we have one regional registry, or we change the laws to allow the registration from a CARICOM country, because in a perfectly working single market, that registration should be able to be impactful across the region. And these are the kinds of things that we'll have to do to make the single market and economy more than just a quoted phrase.
So the task force that President Ali just referred to, as well as the framework, the policy framework that you want to set up, where you would basically not leave the regulations or the laws up to interpretation, that is between Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana?
Let me help in a bit here too. Maybe I wasn't clear on it. So, Prime Minister Motley coined the phrase, the coalition of the willing. Very important phrase. We can decide whether we wait until everyone is ready, or that we have countries who are ready to move forward in particular areas. Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, we have accepted that there are areas that must be improved. We have now developed a mechanism through which we're going to advance work in those areas. The task force would be looking at the Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana issues. What are the issues that affect the efficient, I won't say free, efficient movement of goods into Guyana, into Trinidad and Tobago. And how do we, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, resolve these issues? How do we ensure that the mechanism is in place to resolve it in a sustainable way? That is what the task force is doing. Those issues are already identified and work has already begun on sorting those issues out. However, there's a second component to this. And if we work together and we demonstrate to the rest of the region that this is a successful pathway, because Barbados and Guyana is also doing the similar thing, then we are making it easier for the long quartet meetings to become shorter, because we are removing block by block. And that is critical, because if, for example, Trinidad and Tobago decide that we're going to put a lot of investment in the transport and logistics hub, in the supply chain, then those barriers must not be there. But this conversation has to even go a step further, because we have linked the supply chain to the production chain. How are we going to ensure that for production within the region, there is at every port an arrangement in place to support that production, and you don't pay the high rates? How do we ensure that our tax system support the whole mechanism? That is not the conversation we're having now, but that is where this conversation will eventually evolve. We are hoping and working to remove the bugbearer on the quartet agenda and go to real business, the policy orientation of quartet in supporting what we're trying to develop in the region.
Let me just quickly ask one more question. You know, based on these talks that we're having, has it been discussed or studied based on our offerings as individual countries as to how much we could reduce our food inflation by should this partnership between both countries, you know, materialize?
You can't advance the output of the next 2 days. Otherwise, you would not want to come. But definitely, you will be shocked to see the level of work and planning that has already taken place.
One word can cover the question, answer your question, and the word is significant.
Significant.
We can significantly, positively impact not just our supply chain, but our affordability and our costs.
And you will see it demonstrated in the work that has been done and the plans. At the conference, we will have a report, and that is one of the features of what we're doing. We're not shying away from our targets in the 25 by 2025 program. You would hardly find a group of countries setting targets like these. That should tell you something about our commitment to ensuring that this is successful.
President Ali, Anna Ramdas from the Express newspaper, there has been reports about difficulty in the ease of doing business in Guyana. Has that been resolved? And secondly, can you quantify the amount of businesses that have set up, Trinidadian businesses that have set up shop in Guyana over the past few years? And I have one question for your Prime Minister.
All right. So let me start from the second question. I do not seek to quantify individual investors from any country. I see investors from every country as equal as investors within Guyana. And yes, if you look at from a regional perspective, most of the investors from the region are from Trinidad and Tobago in Guyana. Most of our new investors in the construction sector, in the oil and gas sector, are from Trinidad and Tobago. There is active participation of investors from Trinidad and Tobago in the economy of Guyana, and we welcome that. We have been even encouraging investors from Trinidad and Tobago to partner with investors from Guyana because we want a win-win scenario. So I would say that there is significant, borrowing your word, significant investment in investors from Trinidad and Tobago in Guyana, and that should not be an issue. Secondly, the ease of doing business depends on who is looking at it and for what purpose you're looking at the ease of doing business. We are trying now to work on a system that is archaic in some instance. Take, for example, the issue of a construction permit. A construction permit, you have to go through layers of approval. And I'm very frank and transparent and open on this. We can't continue to build a modern and efficient country going through those layers. So we are now working on a program to develop a single window approval system, where you go to one window, you supply all your information, it is then transmitted electronically to all the agencies. There is time frame through which they must respond. If you don't respond within a particular time, it is taken as approval. That is a system we're developing. Now, there are others who might say that the ease of doing business is difficult because they're not getting through it a particular way they want to operate. That is a different scenario. Maybe for them, ease of business is relaxing everything and to do what they please. For me, that is not ease of doing business. That is not following the guidelines. So it depends on who is seeking the clarification and for what purpose the clarification is sought. As far as I'm concerned, like the rest of CARICOM, our business environment, our business platform, and the opportunity to design is as easy for anyone in the region as it is for Guyanese. It is the same laws, it is the same guideline, it is the same rules. Now, when it comes to improving the system, I'm with you. There are many areas that the system must be improved that we are working on to improve. But in terms of specific difficulties from anyone in relation to developing a business, I don't see a problem.
Thank you. Prime Minister, given this focus on food stability and security for the region and the global factors that the region has experienced in terms of the high cost of food that we're seeing now, we have budget coming around. Can we expect to see a bit of a higher allocation towards the Ministry of Agriculture?
I wouldn't want to speak for the Minister of Finance at this time, but suffice it to say that some of the things that we are having on the table now and some of the commitments we've made at the level of the Cabinet already, some of which are in this document I just made there, would require budgetary allocations. And to that extent, you will see some line items improved. And we do have some significant commitments already. And the role of the state and the private sector will become clearer and more critical as we go forward here. Because this forum we're having here now is called an investment forum. Significant changes and improvements in our production systems will not come about unless there is significant financial investment. And that investment really should be coming from the private sector, with the government playing a supportive role on technical support and systemic support. But in terms of who is going to milk the cow, who is going to look at the rice field, who's going to plant the soya, who's going to plant the corn, that is private sector investment. And that's where we need to look to see if there's any private sector allocation, if there's any private sector investment. And so far, it has been very encouraging.
Sorry, permit me to ask, do we have a time frame for the implementation of this task force that you would have spoken about?
Well, we are, some people are already at work. The MOU is already in the hands of technical people on both sides, and a lot of work is going on. The task force that I mentioned this morning was the one on energy, and the time frame to report is end of September. And that is specifically to do with options available for development of the gas business. So we are working against time frames, and even this very document I mentioned here, it has 4 columns. One column, that's 5 columns. Column number 4 is timeline. everything that we're working on, we try to put into a timeline. So we are, in fact, working against timelines, but there's no one timeline for everything to come together. There are a number of different components.
I meant the task force for, in terms of addressing the
tariff barriers.
yeah, the tariff barriers.
That's already in place.
That's in place, and we have timelines. But what we can do, what we can assure you, is that we can update the media, we can update you. The ministers are available to provide answers, because we are very committed to this.
President Ali, you stated during your contributions that your idea of 10 companies coming over to Guyana to take up jobs, to do jobs in terms of oil and gas, is not what you would term being successful towards sustainability within the energy sector. How do you see this this partnership between the two countries as it relates to energy? What would you consider being successful between the two countries in terms of energy?
I didn't say exactly that. So I give the example of companies participating in the energy sector in Guyana, which we welcome. But those companies are participating at an individual level. If you look at things from a development perspective, you have transactional issues and you have macro issues. So just think about it in that context. One is that these companies are companies. They are doing transactions to benefit the company. What we're talking about is a macro issue. And that macro issue is that we have resources in Suriname, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago that can be part of a solution of a macro issue, and that macro issue is energy security. And that is where the policy formulation and what we're talking about. Addressing our thoughts and our ideas and our policies and looking at the options that will provide a solution for the macro issue, not from a transactional perspective, but from a macro perspective.
Thank you very much. I think let's take one more question if there is that, and then we have to break and move on to the next item for the day, which is a quick lunch, and then head to Point Lisa. So if there is no other question, that's okay. You have one more?
I have a couple.
This has to be the last one, right? So please.
All right. I wanted to go a little bit outside of the agriculture sector itself. There are several other barriers, especially as my colleague here spoke about ease of doing business. There were issues sort of as far as banks are concerned. There were concerns over Trinidadian banks having a major share in Guyana's national depository, issues dealing with companies from energy companies and stuff like that. That will sort of slowed down by the Local Content Act. Were these issues discussed at any point?
That is a total misinterpretation of the Local Content Act and what is taking place. So let me just address this very quickly. In any financial system, the central bank makes decisions on the monetary side. Republic Bank is one of our major players in Guyana, and has been so consistently. Now, there's a concentration of capital that you have to look at. In making a decision as to how things move forward, you have to look at the concentration of capital. So, in this specific issue you're speaking about, Republic Bank was the first, I think, bidder who put in a proposal. You have to look. And the financial sector understands this. It's a work in progress. Sometimes we put our own interpretation on things. The financial sector and Republic Bank is working with us on many other important initiatives right now. So I see no issue in terms of the financial sector. In terms of the local content legislation, the local content legislation is there to support every single person. But if someone comes to you and say to you that after all these years of being independent, you can't provide brokerage service for yourself, or you can't provide taxi service for yourself, or you can't provide vehicle rental for yourself, then we have serious problems. So all the local content legislation did was to do a minimal carve-out for what capacity we have. Very minimal carve-out. That is all it did. No different from anything else anyone would do. Now, it provides an opportunity for the transfer of technology and for the detail and technical skills that we don't have at all. The scope is there and it's being made use of by many companies out of Trinidad and Tobago and other places around the world. Many, many global companies are coming. So, again, it comes to how someone may want to interpret something for a specific outcome. Let's not do that. Let us look at a policy in its totality and understand what the policy is seeking to achieve in its totality. You see, as a region, we don't spend enough time on the analysis, the total analysis. We go for song bites. And in going for song bites, sometimes we miss the big picture. I don't want us ever to miss the big picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Ali. I think we're going to spend the rest of the afternoon together. So let's try and keep the schedule. So I want to thank the media again for your presence and for your questions. And let us go on and see if we can complete the day as per the stated schedule. Thank you very much.